Good day, everyone. Today, my group members Matthew Burke, Justin Ragunanan, Logan Hay, Kadeen Mitchell, and myself, Megan Lalchan, will be taking you through the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment. Bias and discrimination affect how people are treated and how they see themselves. One of the most famous psychological experiments to prove this was Jane Elliott's Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment. In 1968, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Elliott, a third grade teacher in Iowa, wanted her students to understand what discrimination feels like. She divided them by eye color. Blue eyed kids were labeled as superior, while brown eyed kids were labeled as inferior. The results were almost immediate. The superior group became more confident and performed better in class, while the inferior group became withdrawn and made lots of mistakes, even on things they were normally really good at. The next day, Elliott flipped the rules, and the same pattern emerged. This experiment still holds true today. In Trinidad, especially with elections approaching, people often judge politicians based on ethnicity, party affiliation, or even appearance, just like how Elliott students were treated differently over something as random as their eye color. These biases don't just influence politics, they show up in schools and workplaces too. It shapes people's confidence, opportunities, and even at times their success. Imagine walking into your school and your teacher tells you that because of your eye color, you're either smarter, more important, and deserve special treatment, or that you're not. That's exactly what Jane Elliott did in her classroom. She told her third graders that blue eyed students were naturally better. They were smarter, cleaner, and more capable. To reinforce this, she gave them privileges: longer recesses, front row seats, first access to drinking fountains, positive reinforcement such as praise, encouragement, and even extra attention. Meanwhile, the brown eyed students faced the opposite treatment. They had to wear collars so everyone could recognize them as less than. They were denied certain privileges: shorter recess, back row seats, no access to the drinking fountain, especially before the blue eyed students. They were spoken to harshly and treated as if they were slower and less than. The reaction, it was immediate. The blue eyed kids started acting a lot more confident. They became more outspoken and even performed better at their schoolwork. Meanwhile, however, the brown eyed kids became withdrawn, hesitant, and struggled with tasks they normally excel at. Then, the next day, Elliot told them that she had made a horrible mistake. Actually, the brown eyed students were the superior group, and the blue eyed students were the inferior ones. And just like that, the roles reversed. The brown eyed students became more confident and excelled, while the blue eyed students became insecure and they performed poorly. What's shocking is that nothing about these children actually changed, except how they were treated. Yet, that alone was enough to impact their confidence and their abilities. In this experiment, it is a perfect example of how bias and discrimination shape our behavior. And it's not just about eye color, it happens every day in real life. Think about Trinidad. And students sometimes judge based on their school, background, or how they speak rather than their actual abilities. In workplaces, aren't certain people treated better simply because of their social status or their last name? And with elections coming up, how often do voters make decisions based on race, party, loyalty, or a candidate's appearance rather than just the actual policies? Jane Elliott later conducted this experiment with adults in workplaces, and the results were the exact same. When people were treated less than, their confidence plummeted and their behavior suffered. When they were treated more superior, however, they acted accordingly, even at the expense of others. The key takeaway: if something as simple as eye color could change a child's confidence, and success in just 2 days, imagine how much real world biases based on race, gender, social class would impact their lives every single day. And the truth is, this isn't just a history lesson, it's still happening right here today in Trinidad. Let's look at a modified version of this experiment in one of our local classrooms. Pay careful attention to the facial expressions of the students. So, I'm giving your stickers, right? Put it on your shirt. So can the children who got red stars stand? Can the children who got silver stars stand? Okay, good. So from next week, my silver star children, they are going to be line leaders. They are going to they're going to have the duties such as going for the lunch, right? And you all will actually have the opportunity to be the next school prefect, right? You can also answer questions first from next week to win our weekly prize, right? However, my red star children, you will not be doing that. You will have to wait on them because this side of the class is a bit better than you all. How do you all feel about that? Huh? Good? And how do you all feel about that? Huh? Why does that make you feel sad? Huh? Okay, so Amari, are you okay? No? You feeling a bit sad? Okay, you feel sad because you have a red star. But I just checked back my laptop and I actually made a mistake. It's the red star children who has the opportunity next week. And it's the silver ones who don't. Okay, class. So do you all think what I just did was fair? Children with red stars, do you think that was fair? Huh? Why not? Swara, stand and tell me. And how did I decide based on what? The color of your what? Stan, what color did you all get? And what color did you all get? All right.
We will now be looking at some key psychological concepts. So why does this experiment work the way it does? It's not just about eye color, it's about how we learn, how we see ourselves, and how society shapes our behavior. Let's break it down. The social learning theory was proposed by Albert Bandura in 1977. You ever notice how children pick up behaviors just by watching the people around them? That's social learning. We learn from what we see and experience. In the experiment, when the teacher treated one group as better, the children didn't just accept it, they started acting the part. The superior group became more confident, assertive, and even a little arrogant. The inferior group became hesitant, withdrawn, and struggled with simple tasks. This is exactly how children learn behaviors in real life. If they are constantly told they are not good enough, they start believing it. The self-fulfilling prophecy was another theory proposed by Robert Merton in 1949. Have you ever been told that you are so smart or you're not good in maths, and then found yourself living up to that label? That's the self-fulfilling prophecy at work. If a student is constantly praised, they gain confidence and work harder to meet expectations. But if a student is always doubted, they start believing that they are not capable, which affects their performance. In the experiment, the children who were labeled as less intelligent started struggling, even though they were just as capable as the other group. This happens in real classrooms all the time. Teachers may unintentionally expect less from certain students based on their background, and those students end up performing worse because of it. Steele and Aronson in 1995 proposed a theory called stereotype threat. Now, this one is kind of a big deal. When people know there's a negative stereotype about them, it can actually hurt their performance. In the experiment, once the inferior group internalized that they weren't as smart or capable, they performed worse on tasks. In real life, if a student hears girls aren't good at science or students from rural areas don't do well in exams, they might actually perform worse just because of the pressure of the stereotype. This happens in Trinidad and Tobago. Students from less recognized schools might feel they have something to prove and struggle under that pressure, even if they are just as smart as others. In-group versus out-group bias was a theory proposed by Tajfel and Turner in 1979. This is the whole us versus them mentality. People naturally form groups and tend to favor their own group while being skeptical or even dismissive of outsiders. In the experiment, as soon as the children were divided into blue-eyed versus brown-eyed, they quickly started seeing each other as different, even though they were all classmates just the day before. In our country, we see this with race, class, schools, and even accents, when some people automatically assume others are less than just because they belong to a different group. This is why breaking down bias and stereotypes is so important, because when we start treating people based on who they really are, not just what group they are in, we create fairer and more inclusive spaces.
All right, let's bring this experiment closer to home, right here in Trinidad. We'd love to believe that bias and discrimination don't exist in our schools and workplace. But let's be real, they do. Maybe not as obvious as Jane Elliott's colors and eye color segregation, but it happens in more subtle ways. Think about it. How often do people in Trinidad make snap judgments based on the following: skin color, fairer skinned people are more attractive, social class bias, if you're from a prestige school, you must be smart, accent and dialect bias. She talking too much Creole, she must be uneducated. And last names. The last names sounds like money. And on neighborhoods. He from Laventille? He might be trouble. Education. Students perform differently based on teacher expectations and sociable labels. Student performance is influenced by self-perception and reinforcement. We can also see in the workplace and social discrimination, bias affects hiring, promotions, and workplace dynamics. Employees labeled as less competent may experience lower confidence and productivity. And politics and elections. Voter discretions are often influenced by ethnic, racial, and party bias rather than merit. Candidates can benefit from or suffer due to perceived social labels. The experiment provided how discrimination affects behavior, performance, and self-esteem. Bias is not just a personal belief, but a structural issue influencing education, workplaces, and politics. Society must be aware of unconscious biases and work towards equity and inclusivity. These automatic assumptions shape the way people are treated without them even realizing it, just like in the blue eye brown eyes experiment. Now let's zoom in on how this bias shows up in schools. Teachers are supposed to treat all students fairly, right? But here's the thing, bias can be unconscious, meaning even the best teachers might be guilty of it whether or not they realize it. So let's look at some common scenarios in a Trinidadian classroom. Firstly, prestige school versus government school bias. Students from a well-known prestige school often get more respect and opportunities. If a teacher knows a student went to a government primary school, they might expect less from them academically. Just like in the experiment, expectations shape performance. Students who feel underestimated might not even try, while those seen as smart feel pressured to success. Secondly, the bright versus slow student label. Some students get labeled as naturally bright, while others are seen as not academic. Teachers might call on certain students more, giving them more encouragement and push them towards leadership roles. Meanwhile, others might be overlooked or assumed to be lazy or disruptive, just like the brown-eyed students in the experiment. Over time, the students start to believe the labels and live up or down to their expectations. Third, language and accent bias. A child who speaks Trinidadian Creole fluently might be seen as unpolished compared to the one who speaks standard English. Teachers may correct some students more harshly for their dialect while letting others slide. The blue eyes, brown eye experiment provided that self-esteem affects performance. Students who feel criticized may avoid speaking up in class. Discipline and behavior expectations. In many schools, students from certain ethnic or social backgrounds are punished more harshly for the same behavior. For example, a teacher might say, "He's just being playful," for one student, but call another rude and disrespectful for the same action. Over time, students treated like troublemakers may start acting out because that's what expected of them. So what can we learn from this blue-eyed brown-eye experiment? Well, labels have power. When you expect less from someone, they start to expect less from themselves. Bias can be unintentional. It is not always about racism or malice. Sometimes it's just ingrained and how we were raised. Teachers play a major role, encouraging all students equally, challenging their own biases, and creating an environment where every child feels valued can make a difference. Let's challenge these biases in our classroom, our schools, and in our daily lives. Because, as we've seen, a simple label can change everything.
Values to society and student performance. You ever notice how some students just seem to get all the praises and attention, while others kind of fade into the background? That's bias at work, whether we realize it or not. And the truth is, it has a real lasting effect on students, their confidence, and even their future. How bias hurts students. It messes with their grades. Imagine you're in school and every time you try to answer a question, the teacher kind of brushes you off. But your classmates who comes from a more prestigious school or wealthier background always gets encouraged. Over time, you might just stop trying. Why bother? Nobody expects me to do well anyway. That's how bias can lower motivation and academic performance. Because when teachers don't believe in you, it's hard to believe in yourself. Example, in Trinidad, we often hear things like, well, he went to prestige school, so of course he'll do good, or go UWI. or that school only has slow students, these labels stick. It crushes confidence. Now let's say you speak with a strong Trinidadian accent in class, and every time you answer, someone chuckle or the teacher corrects you in a way that feels embarrassing. You start second guessing yourself. Maybe you stop speaking up altogether. That's how language bias affects students. It makes them feel like they don't belong in certain spaces. Example, some students avoid subjects like English literature or debate competitions because they feel like their accent or way of speaking isn't good enough. It closes doors because they even open. Bias isn't a second thing. The way students are treated in the classroom affects their way through the future. If a student is always overlooked, they might be they might not apply for a scholarship, leadership position, or high level job because they've been conditioned to believe they're not the right fit. In Trinidad, we even see this in the workplace where some people change their accent in interviews or use different version of their name just to get a fair chance. It all starts in school where we learn or unlearn our own words.
Now we can discuss how small changes create a big impact. Teachers need to check their own biases. Let's be real, we all have biases. But teachers have to be extra careful because their words and actions shape young minds. So a solution can be more schools need to introduce bias awareness training for teachers so they can recognize when they're treating students unfairly, even unintentionally. Give every student a voice in the classroom. Classroom should be a safe space where all students feel comfortable speaking up. A solution. Teachers can make a rule where everyone gets a turn to lead, not just the bright students. Encourage students to use their own voice instead of trying to sound proper just to be heard. Representation matters for students. Students need to see themselves reflected in books, history lessons, and role models. A solution. Schools need to include local success stories of people from all backgrounds, not just those from elite schools or wealthy families. For example, highlighting Trinidadian figures who broke barriers despite facing bias. Support systems for students who need it the most. Sometimes students just need one teacher, mentor, or community program to remind them they're capable. A solution. More mentorship programs for students from underserved communities where they can get tutoring, career guidance, and encouragement. For example, programs like rotating student leadership in the classroom, so everyone can get a chance to build confidence. Breaking the cycle. Bias in schools is a big deal, but it's not impossible to change. A few small shifts, teachers being more conscious, students getting equal chances, and schools celebrating diversity can completely transform a child's future. At the end of the day, every student deserves to feel seen, heard, valued, because once they do, there's no limit to what they can achieve. In conclusion, what did we all learn from this? The blue-eyed brown-eyed experiment showed us how quickly people can start treating others unfairly just because of something as random as eye color. And if that can happen in just a few hours, imagine what happens over years when students are treated differently because of their skin color, accent, school, or background. The truth is, bias is real, and it affects how students see themselves, how teachers treat them, and even the opportunities they get later in life. But here's the good news, we can change it. Teachers can be aware of their biases and make sure they're giving every student a fair chance. Schools can create spaces where all students feel valued, no matter where they come from. We as a society can start breaking down those stereotypes so that every child in Trinidad feels like they belong. At the end of the day, education should be about lifting students up, not holding them back because of outdated biases.
Because when we start seeing students for their potential instead of their labels, that's when real change happens, and that's something worth working toward. Now we'd like to review a final thought. Education should empower, not limit. Seeing students for their potential, not their labels, is key to progress. Thank you very much.